They laughed at the pregnant black woman who bought only a tiny cabin, until she opened the door. Rain pours down as Nadia Williams stands before a tiny cabin deep in the woods, gripping a rusted key with trembling fingers. The windows glow with light, and thin smoke rises from the chimney, impossible, because the cabin was supposed to be abandoned for decades. Her clothes are soaked, her stomach heavy with her unborn child, but her eyes stay locked on that strange, welcoming glow. Hours earlier, people at the real estate office laughed behind her back. A pregnant black woman buying a cheap, broken cabin with no electricity or plumbing. They whispered that she'd made a foolish choice. But Nadia had nowhere else to go. This cabin was her last chance. Now, standing on the porch, she notices words carved into the wood, "Those who are cast out shall find refuge." Her heart pounds as she unlocks the door. The key turns easily. Inside, the room is warm, clean, and glowing with firelight. On the table sits an envelope with her name written on it, as if someone knew she was coming. Who left it there? And what secret has been waiting for her all this time? Tell us where you're watching from in the comments, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. Nadia's fingers trembled as she opened the envelope. The paper inside was yellowed at the edges. Written in graceful cursive she recognized immediately. It was her grandmother Clara's handwriting, the same neat loops that once signed birthday cards before she passed 6 months ago. "My dearest Nadia," it began. "If you are reading this, it means you have found your way home." Nadia sank into the nearby chair, reading every word carefully. Clara explained that she had bought this cabin 40 years ago, but no one in the family knew. It had belonged to her mother before her, a refuge hidden deep in the mountains, built on land that once protected their ancestors during dangerous times. Clara wrote that it was more than a home. It was a sanctuary for women of their bloodline who arrived in true need. "The land remembers its own," the letter continued. "It will show you what you need when you are ready to see." Nadia swallowed hard. The words felt alive, as though they were meant to be read at this exact moment. Clara confessed that she had watched over Nadia from afar after she aged out of foster care. She couldn't intervene, but she left her a small inheritance meant to lead her here. "You were never forgotten," the letter read. "This place will care for you as it once cared for me." Nadia lowered the paper, eyes wet. How could her grandmother have known she would end up like this? Alone, pregnant, desperate? It felt impossible. Yet everything around her proved Clara's words were true. The air in the cabin was warm and comforting. Her exhaustion seemed to lift with every breath. She stood and walked through the small space. The wooden floor shone faintly under the firelight, showing no sign of age or neglect. The pantry door creaked as she opened it, revealing neatly stacked jars and fresh food, flour, canned fruit, even loaves of bread that looked like they'd just been baked. The water pump in the corner gave a deep groan when she tested it, then released a steady stream of cold, clear water. Her heart pounded faster. None of this made sense. The place had been empty for decades, according to the records. Yet someone, or something, had kept it alive. In the bedroom, she found a small wooden cradle beside the bed. It was already lined with clean baby blankets folded neatly, waiting. Nadia touched the fabric with trembling hands. The quilt patterns were old-fashioned, the kind her grandmother used to make. For a moment, she felt her baby shift gently inside her, as if responding to the touch. She noticed a leather-bound book resting on the nightstand. The cover was cracked and soft from age. In gold lettering, it read, "The Williams Women, 1863 present." Nadia opened it carefully. Inside, pages were filled with handwriting in many styles, different inks, different decades. Each page bore a woman's name followed by her story. She didn't have the strength to read it all right now. She placed it back, promising herself she'd explore it in the morning. Exhaustion finally overcame her. She lay down on the bed, her hand resting over her belly. For the first time in months, she felt safe. The fire crackled softly, filling the silence with gentle warmth. Her eyes closed. Sleep came quickly, deep and heavy. In her dream, she stood in a wide circle surrounded by black women of all ages. Their faces glowed in the firelight. Some wore simple cotton dresses like those in old photographs. Others wore headscarves and aprons, and one wore a 1960s church hat with pearls that caught the light. They all turned to look at her. None spoke, yet Nadia understood. These were her ancestors, the women whose names filled the journal by her bed. They had all lived here, all sought safety within these walls. The oldest woman reached out her hand. Her skin was dark and strong, her expression calm and knowing. "You made it," she whispered. Nadia tried to ask what this place truly was, but before she could speak, the fire roared higher, and the faces began to fade. When she opened her eyes, morning light filtered through the window. The fire was gone, yet the room was still warm. She looked toward the cradle. The blanket inside had shifted slightly, as if touched during the night. Nadia pressed her hand to her chest. The dream felt real, too real. She didn't know what was waiting for her next, but something deep inside told her that the cabin was only beginning to reveal its secrets. The next morning, sunlight streamed softly through the small cabin windows. Nadia sat up slowly, disoriented but rested. For the first time in months, she had slept through the night. Her back still ached, and the baby shifted under her ribs, but there was peace in the stillness that felt foreign to her. The fire had gone out, yet the air was still warm. Her eyes fell on the leather journal on the nightstand. The Williams Women, 1863, present. She reached for it with both hands, her curiosity stronger than her fear. The cover creaked as she opened it, releasing the faint scent of smoke and old paper. The first entry was dated 1863 and written in neat, slanted handwriting. "My name is Patience Williams," it began. "I write this so that my daughters, and their daughters after them, will remember. The water spoke to me. It led me through Union lines to this valley where the trees made a wall against danger. Here, I built my first fire and promised this land would always give safety to women of my blood." Nadia read the line again, whispering the words under her breath. Patience Williams. Her ancestor. The first woman to build this place. The next pages were filled with drawings of plants, roots, and notes about how to treat fever and hunger. Patience had escaped slavery and created a refuge in this hidden valley, surviving by listening to the land. "The stream near the oak," she wrote, "never dries and never turns foul. It feeds those who come thirsty." As Nadia flipped through the journal, she noticed the handwriting changed with each generation. Ruth, Patience's daughter, had added her own notes during the Reconstruction years. Her entries described growing crops, building a stronger roof, and helping others who sought safety after the war. "We take in those who are hunted," Ruth wrote. "We ask no questions. The land provides when hearts are true." Nadia traced the fading ink with her fingertips, feeling a connection she'd never known before. Each woman seemed to speak directly to her across time. Mary's handwriting came next, Ruth's daughter, writing in 1895. "They burned our neighbor's farm last night," one entry read. "We opened the door to their children. The forest hid them as if it knew they belonged." The journal became more than a family record. It was a map of survival and resistance. Each page showed how the women of her family had turned this hidden land into a place of strength when the world outside gave them none. When Nadia reached the 1920s entries, her breath caught. Her great-great-grandmother, Lillian, had written, "The cabin grows when it must. We added 2 rooms after the last fire. I do not understand how the beams came to fit so perfect. Perhaps the land knows what we need before we ask." Nadia looked up from the book, scanning the small room. The beams above her head looked old, yet seamless, like they had always been there. Could the cabin truly change itself? The thought sent chills up her spine. Turning more pages, she reached the 1960s. Her great-grandmother Helen had written in looping, confident handwriting, "Freedom Riders came through Dawson County last week." The sheriff's men followed close behind. I kept the lamps low and the children quiet. The men searched the valley but never found this cabin. It was as if the fog itself wrapped around us and hid us from sight. Nadia's throat tightened. These weren't just stories. They were pieces of her history that had never been told. Women who had risked their lives, using this hidden sanctuary as a shield against hate and violence. Then she saw the handwriting she recognized instantly, her grandmother Clara's. The first entry dated 1985. "I came here after leaving him," it read. "He said no one would want me, that I'd have nothing. But the cabin welcomed me. The pantry was full. The fire burned though I never struck a match. I slept for 2 days and woke feeling whole again. This place remembers pain but returns peace in its place." Nadia covered her mouth, her chest tight. She thought of the man Clara had left, the family that never spoke about it. Now she understood why. The cabin had been Clara's salvation, too. As she continued reading, Clara's later entries took on a tone of quiet instruction. "To the woman who finds this after me," one note said, "know that this home responds to truth. It does not open itself to greed or pride. Only to need. When you come here broken, the land will mend what the world tore apart." On another page, Nadia read the words that made her heart stop. "The land provides for its own. It will feed, heal, and protect, but only those who belong. The cabin knows when one of our line arrives in real need. It will make itself known, as it did for me, as it once did for Patience." She sat back, stunned. The food in the pantry. The water. The warmth that never faded. It wasn't coincidence or luck. It was part of the cabin's nature. Her hand drifted to her belly. The baby kicked gently, as if acknowledging what she'd just learned. Nadia closed the journal and held it to her chest. All her life, she'd felt cut off from her roots, from any sense of belonging. Now, sitting in this room filled with her ancestors' words, she realized she wasn't alone. She was part of something much larger, something that had endured for generations through strength, pain, and love. As the firelight flickered, she looked around again. The cabin seemed to hum softly, almost like it was breathing. "The land remembers its own," she whispered, repeating her grandmother's words. That morning, the valley outside was quiet and still. The birds sang softly through the open window. But inside, Nadia felt a pulse of energy moving through the walls, through the air, through her. The cabin wasn't just a home. It was a promise, a legacy that had been waiting for her to return. The next afternoon, clouds gathered low over the valley. Nadia sat near the fireplace, the journal open on her lap. Her grandmother's handwriting filled the final pages, entries written during her last years. Behind the stone hearth, Clara had written, "You will find a panel. It hides what belongs to you. I could not give it to you in life, but the land has kept it safe. Take only what you understand, and let the rest reveal itself in time." Nadia set the book down and looked at the fireplace. The stones were smooth and gray, fitted tightly together. She ran her hand along the edges, pressing gently until one of the stones shifted slightly beneath her touch. A faint click followed. Heart pounding, she pushed. A square section of the stone wall slid forward, revealing a narrow doorway. Dust drifted into the air, and the scent of cedar filled her nose. She hesitated for a moment, staring into the dim space beyond. The opening was barely wide enough to squeeze through. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. The small hidden room felt untouched by time. Shelves lined the walls, holding metal boxes, bundles of papers tied with twine, and several framed photographs. A single lantern sat on a wooden crate. When she lifted it, the flame came to life instantly. No lighter, no matches. Her breath caught. "Thank you, Grandma," she whispered softly. She began to look through the photographs first. The oldest ones were black and white, edges worn and curling. Women stood proudly in front of the same cabin, decade after decade. Some wore headscarves and long dresses. Others wore simple cotton skirts or pressed 1950s blouses. Though separated by time, they all shared something familiar: high cheekbones, warm brown skin, and the same sharp, determined eyes she saw every morning in her own reflection. Each generation had posed in nearly the same spot, under the same tree that still stood in the clearing outside. The last photo showed Clara, standing alone with her hand on her hip and a soft smile that looked both proud and sad. Tears filled Nadia's eyes. "You were waiting for me," she said quietly. Next, she turned to the stack of folders arranged on the crate. Inside were legal documents, deeds, maps, and property records. Her grandmother's name appeared on several, but there were others with older signatures: Ruth Williams, Lillian Williams, Helen Williams. As she read, the truth unfolded piece by piece. The cabin wasn't just a single structure on a few acres of forgotten land. Over more than a century, the women in her family had purchased small parcels surrounding it whenever they could. A half-acre here, 5 acres there, handed down quietly through generations. Together, those pieces formed a vast area of 200 acres, protected by a trust that prevented it from ever being sold or developed. There were additional papers for mineral rights, timber rights, and even water rights connected to the stream that flowed behind the cabin. The document stated clearly that all profits from any harvesting or leasing were to remain in family accounts, managed by the current matriarch. Nadia sank onto a nearby stool, overwhelmed. She flipped through the folders again, her eyes catching on a recent bank statement printed just a year before Clara's death. The balance made her heart race: $412,000 spread across several accounts in Clara's name. Notes in the margins explained how the funds came from leasing water rights to nearby towns and limited timber harvesting that preserved the forest's health. Her grandmother hadn't been a poor, struggling woman as she'd assumed. She'd been the quiet guardian of an inheritance built by generations of strong women. Nadia pressed a hand to her chest, tears running freely now. For years, she'd felt cursed, every step forward in life followed by another setback. Yet here was proof that her bloodline had never been broken. Every woman before her had worked to protect something lasting, something sacred. On the far wall, she noticed a wooden box with brass hinges and Clara's initials carved into the lid. She opened it carefully. Inside were personal papers, a folded birth certificate, a sealed envelope, and a locket containing 2 photographs, a young woman holding a baby, and a teenage girl with a smile so familiar it made Nadia's throat close. Hands shaking, she unfolded the birth certificate. Her eyes widened as she read the name printed there. Mother, Grace Williams. Grandmother, Clara Williams. Her breath caught. Grace. The name sounded distant, half forgotten, but she remembered seeing it once, on an old foster file from years ago. She'd always believed she'd been adopted after her birth mother gave her up. What she hadn't known was that her grandmother, Clara, had been Grace's mother. That meant the woman she thought of as a distant relative had been her biological grandmother all along. The sealed envelope bore her name. She tore it open gently. Inside was a handwritten note from Clara. "My sweet girl," it began, "there were choices I made that hurt us both. Your mother, Grace, came to me at 17, afraid and lost. I made her give you up, believing it was for the best. When she passed years later, I could not undo that choice. But I made this promise: you would never be forgotten, and when the time was right, you would find your way home. The words blurred as Nadia's tears hit the page. You were meant to have this, the letter continued. This land, this legacy, and the love of all who came before you. The wealth we protected is not only money, but memory. Use it to live without fear. Use it to raise your child free. Nadia pressed the paper to her heart. The hidden room seemed to hum softly around her, as if the walls themselves acknowledged the truth being revealed. She took a deep breath and looked again at the photographs, the faces of her ancestors staring back at her, proud and unyielding. Every generation had carried the weight of this secret. Now it was hers to protect and pass forward. As she stepped out of the hidden room, the fire flared brighter in the hearth, though she hadn't touched it. The air warmed, wrapping around her like an embrace. For the first time since she could remember, Nadia didn't feel lost. She felt chosen. The past had finally reached out and found her. 3 days after settling into the cabin, the peace Nadia had come to trust was broken by the sound of tires crunching on gravel. She stepped out onto the porch, shielding her eyes from the afternoon sun. A sleek black SUV rolled to a stop at the base of the path. 3 men stepped out, well-dressed, confident, and out of place amid the whispering trees. The one in front smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ms. Williams?" he asked, extending his hand. "Robert Pritchard. I've been trying to reach the owner of this property for quite some time." Nadia didn't take his hand. "You found her," she said simply. Pritchard's smile wavered, then recovered. "Well, that's good news for both of us. You see, I represent a group that's developing a luxury resort just beyond your boundary line. Your land is the final piece we need to complete the project. Without it, we're limited. I'd like to make you an offer." His associate stood a few feet behind him, arms crossed, eyes scanning the cabin with undisguised curiosity. "I'm not selling," Nadia replied, her voice steady. He chuckled softly, as though she'd made a charming mistake. "I understand. Change can be difficult, especially when you've just moved in. But let's be realistic. Maintaining a place like this, alone, can get expensive. Taxes, upkeep, insurance. I'm sure that's a heavy burden, given your situation." Her chest tightened. "What situation is that?" He waved a hand vaguely. "Oh, come now. You seem resourceful, but this isn't exactly a starter home. My investors are prepared to offer $50,000. Cash. Today." He gestured toward the SUV. "We even brought the paperwork. You sign, and this property's no longer your problem. You can start fresh somewhere more comfortable." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint sound of thunder. Nadia crossed her arms. "You're wasting your time. This land isn't for sale. Not to you, not to anyone." The friendly mask fell from his face. "That's a shame," he said, his tone sharpening. "I'd hate for you to have trouble keeping up with your property taxes. Zoning laws can get complicated out here, and it'd be unfortunate if an oversight caused you legal trouble." He took a slow step closer, lowering his voice. "It's difficult for someone like you to manage land of this size without proper connections. I'm offering you a way out before things get complicated." Her pulse quickened. She met his gaze without flinching. "This land's been in my family longer than your company's existed. You should leave before you say something you can't take back." Pritchard's jaw tightened. His associates shifted uneasily. After a long silence, he smoothed his jacket and gave a tight smile. "We'll be in touch. I'd reconsider if I were you." They turned and walked back to the SUV. As the vehicle disappeared down the muddy road, Nadia felt the first cold drop of rain hit her cheek. By nightfall, the storm had become a living thing. Wind howled through the trees, shaking the cabin's frame. Rain hammered the roof in heavy sheets, and thunder rolled across the valley in endless waves. Inside, Nadia moved quickly to secure the windows, her hands trembling. A sharp pain gripped her abdomen, sudden and deep. She gasped, clutching her belly. Another contraction followed moments later, stronger this time. "Not now," she whispered, bracing herself against the wall. Her phone had no signal. The roads were already flooding. The nearest hospital was miles away. Lightning flashed through the windows, and she caught her reflection in the glass, sweat on her brow, fear in her eyes. Her breath came fast, uneven. She remembered something from the journal, Clara's entry near the end. A note about a brass bell hidden in the bedroom closet. In moment of true need, Clara had written, "Ring the bell 3 times. The land remembers those who serve it, and help will come." It had seemed poetic at the time. Now, with pain tightening around her like a vice, Nadia was willing to believe in anything. She stumbled toward the bedroom, gripping furniture for balance. The storm roared louder, the wind slamming branches against the walls. Each contraction came faster than the last. Inside the closet, she dropped to her knees and began feeling along the wooden boards. Her fingertips brushed something cold and round. She pulled out a small brass bell, dull with age but heavy in her palm. She stared at it, heart racing. It looked ordinary. No glow, no hum, no sign of power. Still, she lifted it and rang it once. The sound was clear, pure, and strangely steady despite the storm. Another contraction hit, and she cried out. Gritting her teeth, she rang the bell 2 more times, each chime echoing longer than it should have, fading into the thunder like a voice carried through time. When the final note died, everything stilled. For one long moment, the storm outside paused, as if the valley itself had drawn a breath. Then the wind returned, but its rhythm had changed. It no longer sounded chaotic, but purposeful, almost guiding. The lights flickered, and the fire in the hearth roared higher, burning with sudden warmth. Nadia sank to the floor, clutching her belly, half praying, half whispering Clara's name. "Please," she said through tears. "I can't do this alone." From somewhere beyond the storm, a faint light appeared through the window, soft, golden, and moving steadily up the flooded path. It wasn't a car's headlights. It looked like a lantern. Nadia blinked, struggling to focus. The light grew brighter, closer, until it illuminated the porch. She could almost make out a figure, tall, wrapped in a shawl, her outline familiar in a way that defied reason. The brass bell, still in Nadia's hand, vibrated gently. She felt a calm settle over her, a warmth that cut through the fear. The storm still raged, but inside the cabin, there was peace. The contractions slowed just enough for her to breathe again. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Outside, thunder rolled one last time, not in fury but in answer. The rain had not stopped. It came in waves, slamming against the roof with such force that the sound swallowed every other noise. Nadia lay on the floor, the brass bell still warm in her palm, her breath shallow and uneven. Between contractions, she whispered words she didn't fully know were prayers. A faint knock came through the storm, so light she almost thought she imagined it. Another followed, firmer this time. Gathering her strength, Nadia dragged herself toward the door. When she opened it, wind and rain rushed in, along with a figure wrapped in a heavy coat. An elderly black woman stood there, drenched but steady. Her gray hair was tucked beneath a scarf, her eyes sharp but kind. "You called," she said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. "I'm Esther May. Heard the bell." Nadia blinked through tears. "The bell? You heard it from where?" The woman smiled faintly. "Far enough. Near enough. Don't matter. That bell don't ring for no reason. Your grandmother Clara helped my daughter through a storm not unlike this, near 30 years back. Guess it's my turn to return the favor." Before Nadia could respond, Estimé was already moving. She took off her coat, hung it neatly, and began setting up with the calm authority of someone who had done this many times before. "Let's get you comfortable, child. Baby's ready, but we're gonna make this safe." Her hands were weathered but strong. She checked the fire, added wood, laid clean sheets from a linen chest Nadia hadn't opened yet, and gathered towels that seemed to have been waiting for this moment. "You knew Clara?" Nadia asked between breaths. "Lord, yes," Estimé replied, smiling as she wrung out a cloth. "Knew her mama too. Knew most the women who came through this cabin one way or another. This land has its own way of keeping us connected. Don't matter how much time passes, when a Williams woman's in need, those meant to help always find their way." The next contraction made Nadia double over. Estimé knelt beside her, murmuring soft encouragements. "That's it. Let it come. Don't fight it. You're doing just fine." Through the long night, Estimé's presence anchored her. Between contractions, the midwife talked, not to distract, but to strengthen. "You ever hear of patience?" she asked gently. Nadia shook her head, gripping Estimé's hand as another wave of pain rolled through her. "She was the first," Estimé said. "Escaped slavery in 1863, found this valley when the soldiers were closing in. She said the water itself led her here. Built the first shelter with her own hands. She wasn't alone long, though. Her daughter Ruth came after, then Mary, then the line kept on. Each one carried the others inside her heart, even when they never met face to face." Her voice was rhythmic, almost melodic, weaving history into the cadence of labor. "When the world turned cruel, they came here. When laws failed them, this land didn't. That's what your grandmother meant when she said the land remembers its own." As the hours passed, Nadia's pain and exhaustion blurred into something beyond fear. The cabin seemed alive, its creaks and sighs rhythmic, its air warm despite the raging storm outside. Every time she thought she would break, Estimé's voice guided her back. At one point, during a pause between contractions, Nadia whispered, "Why me? Why now?" Estimé dabbed her forehead with a cool cloth. "Because you needed it. That's how this place works. Don't choose the easy ones. Chooses the ones ready to be remade." The words echoed Clara's letter so perfectly that tears spilled from Nadia's eyes. The night stretched on, thunder rolling like a drumbeat in the distance. Estimé hummed softly, an old hymn Nadia half remembered from childhood. Its melody mixed with the storm, wrapping the room in something that felt sacred. When the final stage came, it arrived with force. Nadia gripped Estimé's arm, sweat beading on her forehead. "I can't." "Yes, you can," Estimé interrupted firmly. "You're a Williams woman. You were born for hard things. Now breathe. Push with every woman who ever stood where you're standing." The fire flared bright as dawn began to creep into the sky. With one last cry, Nadia pushed, and the world changed. The storm outside softened instantly, as though silenced by the newborn's first breath. The cabin itself seemed to sigh. The floor beneath them warmed. The air shimmered faintly with morning light pouring through every crack and window. It wasn't a trick of the sun. It was something older, deeper. Estimé caught the baby and laughed, her voice thick with awe. "There she is. Strong lungs, this one. Healthy as can be." Nadia reached out trembling arms. When the baby was placed against her chest, all the pain dissolved. The tiny girl blinked up at her, dark eyes wide, breathing steady. Outside, the last of the storm clouds broke apart, and sunlight flooded the valley. Every droplet on the window glowed like gold. Estimé placed a hand on Nadia's shoulder. "You see, she said softly. The land knows when new life arrives. It remembers joy same as sorrow. Nadia looked down at her daughter, tears of gratitude tracing her cheeks. She's perfect. Yes, Esther said. She's the next. Another link in a chain that ain't ever been broken. The midwife cleaned up quietly, her movements slow and reverent. The fire crackled gently, the air fragrant with cedar and rain. Nadia, half awake, half dreaming, felt the world settle into harmony. The storm was over, but what it left behind felt like the beginning of something powerful, something she hadn't just inherited but had helped bring into being. As the baby drifted to sleep against her chest, Nadia whispered, "Welcome home." The sun had barely lifted over the ridge when Esther returned, carrying a basket of herbs and a tin of warm broth. The storm had stripped branches and flooded the narrow path, but the cabin stood untouched, its roof dry, its windows clear. Inside, Nadia rocked her newborn by the fire, eyes heavy but heart still beating with disbelief. "You look like you seen a ghost," Esther said, smiling as she set her basket down. "I don't know what I saw," Nadia admitted. "After the bell, after you came, everything felt alive. The wind stopped, the light changed. I swear I could feel the house breathing." Esther nodded as though she'd expected those words. "That's because it was. This land's never just been soil and timber, it's been a keeper. You called, it answered." She ladled some broth into a cup and handed it to Nadia. "Now you need to know what you're sitting on, or else you won't understand why certain men won't ever leave you be." Nadia watched her carefully. "You mean Pritchard?" Esther's eyes darkened. "That man's been circling this place since your grandmother's time. Thinks money can buy roots. But this land don't answer to deeds and signatures, it answers to blood and service." She took a deep breath before continuing. "Long before patients came here, this valley belonged to the Cherokee. They called it a resting place for travelers between worlds. When soldiers pushed them west, some stayed behind, hiding in the hollows. They showed patients how to live with the land, how to draw from its water without wounding it, how to bury stones at the edges so the ground would know its guardians. 7 stones in all, each carved with signs of protection. Those stones still stand. And as long as a Williams woman lives here, no lawman, banker, or thief can take it from you." Nadia leaned forward. "You've seen them?" Esther nodded. "I've tended 2 myself. They're older than any of us, but still warm if you touch them at sunrise. That's the kind of power men like Pritchard never understand. He sees trees and lumber, but what's really here can't be sold or fenced off." The baby stirred, and Nadia cradled her gently. "You said Patience learned from the Cherokee. What happened to her after that?" "She made this land a station," Esther said softly. "During the war, when freedom was a whisper passed hand to hand, she and her daughter Ruth hid people running north. There's a tunnel under this floor, runs straight to the creek bed. They used the bell you found to call for help. 3 rings meant danger, 2 meant safe passage. Over time, folks kept using it. My own great-granddaddy came through here on his way out of Georgia. That bell's been saving lives for over 100 years." Nadia looked down at the brass bell, still resting on the table where she'd left it. Its surface shimmered faintly in the firelight, no longer ordinary metal. "So when I rang it, you didn't just call me," Esther said. "You called every hand that's ever answered it. The ones who built, who fought, who prayed here. That's why the storm calmed. The land remembers its own." Silence filled the room, the kind that hums with meaning. The baby yawned, tiny fingers curling around Nadia's. Esther leaned back and sighed. "Now about Pritchard. He's desperate because he knows the resort's worthless without this spring. His engineers say the water here's the purest in the county, Untouched, mineral-rich, older than any record. What he don't know is that he's tried to buy sacred ground. The last few owners who weren't family, they couldn't stay. Accidents, sickness, bad luck, you name it. The land don't like strangers laying claim to what ain't theirs. So what happens if he keeps pushing? Nadia asked. He will, Estime said. Men like him always do. But don't be afraid. As long as you honor what stands here, the stones, the water, the name, you're protected. Nadia stared into the flames. Clara's letter said this place was both a refuge and a test. I didn't understand it then. Now you do, Estime replied. Freedom's always been both. This house don't just keep you safe. It expects something back. Care for it, listen to it, and when the time comes, it'll fight beside you. The older woman stood and walked to the cradle, her hand hovering over the baby's head. You name her yet? Nadia shook her head. Not yet. I wanted to wait till it felt right. Estime smiled, her eyes distant, remembering. Clara once told me that the next daughter born here should carry the name Patience. Said the name itself holds the rhythm of this land. Freedom takes time. It takes women who know how to endure without breaking. Nadia looked down at her daughter, the tiny heartbeat under her palm, the quiet rise and fall of her chest. Patience, she whispered. That's her. Estime nodded. Then she's already blessed. She reached into her basket and pulled out a smooth stone wrapped in linen. Its surface was carved with a spiral pattern and marked with red clay. This one's yours now. Keep it near the hearth. The others will answer to it. Nadia accepted the stone reverently. The moment her fingers touched it, a warmth spread through her arm, steady and grounding. Estime gathered her things and headed for the door. I'll be back before the next full moon, she said. Keep your lights low, your doors open to the wind, and your faith steady. The land takes care of those who listen. Outside, the morning mist lifted from the valley, revealing the green glow of wet earth. Nadia stood in the doorway with her daughter in her arms, the stone warm against her skin. For the first time, she didn't feel alone. She felt watched over, by the land, by the women before her, by something that moved through time slower than men and money. Something alive. And as the sunlight caught the edges of the distant hills, Nadia whispered a quiet promise into the breeze. This home will never be sold. 2 weeks passed. The valley had settled into a quiet rhythm. Mornings filled with birdsong, evenings thick with the hum of cicadas. Nadia had begun to believe, for a brief stretch of peace, that Pritchard was gone for good. That illusion ended the moment a black SUV rolled up the gravel path, crunching through the damp soil. Robert Pritchard stepped out first, polished shoes, pressed shirt, and that smug half-smile that always seemed to hover between condescension and menace. Behind him, a sheriff's deputy climbed out, holding a folder stuffed with paperwork. Nadia stood on the porch, baby Patience in her arms, the morning light catching the small curl of hair on the infant's forehead. Miss Williams, Pritchard said, voice syrupy but sharp. I'm afraid we have some serious matters to discuss. Code violations. Unpaid property taxes. Possibly even illegal occupancy, depending on what the county finds. The deputy shifted uneasily beside him, eyes downcast. Nadia didn't move. This property's been in my family for generations. Everything's in order. Pritchard let out a small, mocking laugh. I'm sure you believe that. But sometimes people inherit more problems than they realize. I'm here to offer you a chance to walk away clean. $50,000 cash. Today. No strings attached. She looked down at her daughter, then back up at him. This land isn't for sale. His expression darkened. I'd think twice before saying that. These hills can be difficult. Taxes pile up, inspections fail, neighbors stop helping. For someone in your situation, single, no support, things can get complicated fast. The deputy flinched slightly at the tone but stayed silent. Nadia's grip on her daughter didn't tighten. Her heartbeat didn't race. She just said, evenly, "I've read your type before." Pritchard raised a brow. "Excuse me." "My grandmother kept records," she said. "Every letter, every notice, every visit. You've been trying to buy this property for 15 years. The county tax records show it's part of a conservation trust, taxes paid in perpetuity. The cabin passed every structural inspection since 1968, and the spring water's been certified purer than the city's supply." The deputy looked up now, surprised. Nadia continued, calm and deliberate. "I also have copies of 3 fraud complaints filed against you for trying to claim abandoned properties. Clara never used them, said she was waiting for the right moment." She met his gaze. "I think she meant today." The deputy took a step forward. "Mr. Pritchard, is that true?" Pritchard's composure cracked for the first time. His jaw tightened, and a flush crept up his neck. "This is absurd," he snapped. "You don't understand how the county works. These papers." The deputy cut in, voice uncertain. "I'll need to verify everything before proceeding." Pritchard turned on him sharply. "You're here to enforce the law, not question me." "No," Nadia said quietly, her voice cutting through his anger. "He's here to uphold it. And the law says this land is mine." The baby stirred, letting out a soft sound that seemed to echo louder than the man's fury. Pritchard stepped closer to the porch, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the wet ground. "You think a few old papers will protect you," he hissed. "You don't belong out here. Women like you." "Women like me built this place," Nadia interrupted. "We drew water before you learned to sign your name. We buried our dead here. We raised our children here. You have no idea what this land means." The deputy looked between them, clearly torn. Pritchard sneered. "You think some ghost stories and family myths will stand against progress? I've got investors, permits, a timeline. You can't stop what's coming." Nadia shifted Patience higher in her arms, the morning sun spilling across both their faces. "My ancestors survived worse than you," she said calmly. "They built something that can't be bought or bulldozed. This land protects its own. You have no power here." The words hung in the air, measured, final. Then something shifted. A breeze swept across the porch, carrying the faint sound of wind chimes though none were visible. The air seemed to thicken, heavy but steady, like the earth itself was listening. The deputy took a step back, unease flickering across his face. Pritchard scowled. "This isn't over," he spat. "You'll regret crossing me." Nadia's eyes stayed on him. "I won't need to lift a hand. The land remembers those who honor it, and those who don't." As she spoke, thunder rumbled in the distance. A storm cloud rolled low over the ridge, dark but contained, as if forming right above him. Pritchard glanced up, visibly unsettled, though he tried to hide it. "Let's go," the deputy muttered, closing the folder. "We'll need to sort this through the county office. Miss Williams, I'd appreciate copies of those documents." "You'll have them by sundown," Nadia said. The two men turned toward the SUV. Pritchard climbed in without another word, slamming the door hard enough to startle a crow from the fence post. As the vehicle reversed down the path, its tires slipped once in the mud, a sharp, jerking skid that sent a spray of brown water against the door. Nadia didn't move until they disappeared beyond the trees. Inside, she laid the baby in her cradle, the soft light of morning wrapping them both. She went to the mantel and took down the brass bell. It was cool again. Quiet. "Thank you," she whispered, setting it back down. Outside, the wind carried her words away. The storm clouds broke apart, scattering into sunlight. Somewhere beyond the hills, the faint hum of the seven stones pulsed like a heartbeat, steady, ancient, unbroken. Nadia looked down at her daughter and smiled. "You're home, Patience. And no one will ever take this from us." Spring unfurled slowly over the valley, each week bringing a deeper green, a louder chorus of birds, and the scent of new life carried on the wind. The cabin no longer felt like a stranger's inheritance. It breathed in rhythm with Nadia and her child. By April, she had begun to paint again. At first, small sketches, wild violets pressed between journal pages, the outline of a fern curling by the creek, the slope of a mountain softened by mist. But as the days warmed, her hands moved with purpose. She found herself drawn to the same subjects her great-great-grandmother once captured, the living language of plants. She painted the way sunlight slid down moss, the way roots braided beneath the soil, the hidden geometry in every leaf. Her prints, once uploaded to a modest online shop, began to spread. People were drawn to their warmth, their sense of peace. Orders came from faraway cities, from women who said the images made them feel grounded again. For the first time in her life, Nadia wasn't surviving on scraps of time and hope. She was thriving. The inheritance Clara left had given her more than money. It gave her time to listen, to learn, to rebuild. She used some of the funds to add solar panels discreetly on the cabin's roof and to reinforce the porch that had become her daily sanctuary. The renovations were thoughtful, never changing the soul of the place. The creak of the old floors, the hum of bees by the window, the soft murmur of the spring, they all remained. Esther May visited every week, bringing jars of herbs, roots, and stories. Together they brewed teas that eased pain, poultices that healed cuts, and tinctures passed down through generations. She taught Nadia how to dry herbs on cedar racks and how to read the moon's pull on planting cycles. "You keep this up," Esther May said one afternoon, tying bundles of mint. "You'll know this land the way your foremothers did. It'll speak to you before trouble comes." "I think it already does," Nadia replied with a smile. Word of the cabin's renewal spread quietly. Over time, women began visiting, neighbors at first, then strangers who'd heard whispers about a place in the mountains where peace could be found. There was Rosa, a young Latina nurse who came seeking rest after a brutal year in the city. Then June, a Cherokee historian tracing her great-grandmother's path through these same hills. Others followed, widows, artists, mothers, and daughters, each drawn by something they couldn't name. They came with food, seeds, and stories, and the cabin welcomed them all. Together, they worked the garden, shared meals by the fire, and left offerings by the stones at dawn. A quiet sisterhood grew among them, bound by the unspoken understanding that this place was not just soil and timber, it was a living archive of women's endurance. In the evenings, when the baby slept, Nadia wrote. The journal that once held her ancestors' voices now carried her own. She filled its pages with notes on the plants she'd painted, the laughter shared around the table, the ache of missing what she'd never truly had, a mother who'd known how to stay, and the deep relief of no longer feeling alone. She wrote about Marcus, too, not with bitterness, but clarity. His absence no longer defined her. He was the test, she wrote one night. The storm that revealed what was built to last. By midsummer, the baby had begun to crawl, her laughter echoing through the cabin. Nadia often sat on the porch with her, watching the sky shift from gold to rose. She had stopped checking her phone for messages that never came. The silence no longer felt like loneliness, it felt like space to breathe. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the hills in firelight, Nadia opened the old journal beside her. The pages before hers were filled with Clara's steady script, with the voices of Ruth, Lila, and Patience before them. Each woman had written of struggle and survival, of births and burials, of storms and rebuilding. Nadia's pages were lighter, filled with sketches, reflections, and hope. She thought of Barbara at the real estate office, her pity disguised as politeness. She thought of the couple who had laughed when she'd insisted she could make a life here. Their faces no longer stung. They had become symbols of the world she'd outgrown. "They laughed at me," she murmured, her voice soft but certain. "They saw a desperate black woman making a foolish choice. But I found something they'll never understand, a legacy that can't be measured in money. Power that doesn't come from their approval. A belonging they'll spend their lives searching for and never find." Patience gurgled, reaching for a curl of her mother's hair. Nadia smiled and kissed her forehead. "This is what they couldn't see," she whispered. "The blessing in the waiting. The freedom in the roots." She turned to a blank page and began to write. "I am Nadia Williams, mother of Patience Williams, heir to the legacy of strong black women who refused to disappear. This is where our new chapter begins." As twilight deepened, the cabin glowed with lamplight. The trees whispered in rhythm with the baby's soft breaths, and the 7 stones beyond the porch shimmered faintly under the moon, guarding, remembering, enduring. The legacy lived on, not in monuments or money, but in the quiet, unbreakable line of women who kept answering the call of the land and each other. Nadia's journey is a reminder that what people often call weakness can hold the seeds of strength. Her courage, her patience, and her trust in the legacy of those before her turned struggle into purpose. Sometimes the gifts our ancestors leave aren't gold or property. They're resilience, wisdom, and the quiet power to begin again. If this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss what's coming next. We have another powerful story dropping tomorrow that you won't want to miss. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and share this video with someone who might need to hear it today. Your likes, your words, and your support help us keep bringing stories like Nadia's to life. Stories that remind us all that hope, faith, and determination can transform any ending into a new beginning. Thank you for being part of this community.